Detroit, June 1941. Inside the cavernous drafting halls of the Packard Motor Car Company, the air is thick with heat and the sharp tang of ammonia from the blueprint machines. Spread across hundreds of wooden tables lies the supposed salvation of the Royal Air Force, the schematics for the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. But to the American engineers staring down at the papers, they are incomprehensible. The drawings are rendered in first-angle projection, the reverse of US standards. Critical dimensions are missing. Instead of precise numerical tolerances, the margins are filled with vague instructions like file to fit and polish until smooth. This is not a design for mass production. It is a guide for individual craftsmen. Yet the world does not need a dozen engines built by hand. It needs 10,000 built by machine. Before this engine can save a single pilot over Europe, it must first survive the flaw of a Detroit factory. By the frozen winter of 1942, the Allied strategic bombing campaign over Europe is teetering on the edge of catastrophe. The premise of the American 8th Air Force is built on a doctrine of brute force and optimism. The belief that the B-17 flying fortress, bristling with heavy machine guns, is invincible. The theory states that a tight formation of bombers creates a kill box so dense that no German fighter can penetrate it. But above the cloud layers of the Third Reich, theories are dying alongside the crews. The Luftwaffe has adapted. German pilots in Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s have learned to attack the American formations head-on, slashing through the defensive fire at closure rates of 600 miles per hour. They target the cockpits and the engines. When a bomber falls, it does not simply crash. It disintegrates, scattering 10 men and tons of aluminum into the slipstream. The losses are unsustainable. Missions are seeing casualty rates of 10, 15, sometimes 20%. Mathematically, a bomber crew has virtually zero chance of surviving their mandatory 25 missions. The desperate cry from the bomber commanders is for escort fighters, little friends to sweep the skies ahead. But the physics of 1942 aviation offers no solution. The Supermarine Spitfire is a lethal dogfighter, but it burns fuel at a rate that tethers it to the English Channel. It can escort the bombers to the coast of France, but there it must turn back, leaving the big friends to face the gauntlet into Germany alone. The P-47 Thunderbolt is arriving. A massive, rugged brawler, but it too lacks the internal fuel capacity for deep penetration raids. The sky over Germany belongs to the Luftwaffe, a sanctuary where they can assemble, climb, and pick their targets with impunity. Amidst this slaughter, there is a plane already flying in England that possesses the aerodynamic potential to change everything. Yet it is relegated to the sidelines. The North American P-51 Mustang, commissioned by the British Purchasing Commission and designed by Edgar Schmude in a frantic 102 days, the airframe is a masterpiece of drag reduction. It utilizes a laminar flow wing, a radical design that smoothed the air boundary layer, allowing the plane to slice through the atmosphere with significantly less resistance than a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt. However, in 1942, the Mustang is a lion without teeth. It is powered by the Allison V1710 engine. The Allison is a robust, reliable American power plant, excellent for low-altitude dogfights and ground attack missions. At 5,000 feet, the Mustang Mark I is faster than almost anything in the air, but the Allison engine has a fatal flaw for the European theater. It relies on a single-stage supercharger. As an aircraft climbs, the air density drops. Engines need oxygen to burn fuel. Without a mechanism to force-feed compressed air into the cylinders, an engine literally suffocates. At 15,000 feet, the Allison engine begins to gasp. By 20,000 feet, the altitude where the heavy bombers fly and the Luftwaffe hunts, the Mustang is sluggish and unresponsive. It cannot climb to meet the enemy. It is a thoroughbred racehorse trapped in a plow field. The Royal Air Force, recognizing the airframe's low altitude speed, assigns the Mustang to Army Cooperation Command. They use it for photo reconnaissance and train-busting missions across the Channel. It is dangerous, gritty work, skimming the treetops to strafe locomotives, but it is a waste of the most aerodynamically efficient fuselage ever built. The American Army Air Forces, focused on their own P-38s and P-47s, largely ignore the Mustang, viewing it as a niche export product for the British. Meanwhile, the slaughter in the high skies continues. The 8th Air Force is bleeding out. The need is not just for a new plane, it is for a miracle of engineering that can marry the range and efficiency of the Mustang airframe with high altitude power. The solution exists, but it is currently bolting into the nose of the Spitfire Mark IX, the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61. This engine, with its two-stage, two-speed supercharger, maintains power up to 30,000 feet. It is the heart the Mustang is missing. But the Merlin is a British jewel, hand-built in Derby and Crewe, and there are nowhere near enough of them to go around. April 30th, 1942, Duxford Airfield, England. Ronald "Ronnie" Harker, the senior test pilot for Rolls-Royce, climbs into the cockpit of a Mustang Mark I. He is there to evaluate the American import, not as a combat machine, but as a curiosity. The British invite him to see what the fuss is about regarding this low-level scout plane. Harker takes the aircraft up, banking it hard over the Cambridgeshire countryside. He pushes the throttle. The response is immediate. The handling is crisp, the controls light and responsive, even at speed. He dives, he turns, he tests the energy retention. When Harker lands, he is not just impressed, he is agitated. He calculates that at similar power settings, the Mustang is significantly faster than the Spitfire Mark V. The aerodynamics of the North American airframe are cleaner than anything Rolls-Royce has ever seen. He famously tells the engineers on the tarmac, "The point is that the Mustang is roughly 30 miles per hour faster than the Spitfire at the same height." But he adds the caveat that will define the next 2 years of the war. The Allison engine is holding it back. Harker's proposal is simple and radical. Put a Merlin 61 in it. The idea travels up the chain of command with unusual speed. Rolls-Royce engineers quickly modify 5 Mustang airframes, designated Mustang X, fitting them with the high-altitude Merlin 61 engines. The results confirm Harker's intuition. The hybrid fighter hits 433 miles per hour at 22,000 feet. It climbs like a rocket. It is, technically speaking, the perfect escort fighter. But a prototype is not a production line. The Royal Air Force is already straining the limits of British industry. Every Merlin engine rolling out of the factories in Derby, Crewe and Glasgow is already spoken for, destined for a Spitfire, a Hurricane, a Mosquito, or a Lancaster bomber. There is no surplus capacity. If the Mustang is to receive the heart it deserves, the transplant cannot happen in England. Across the Atlantic, the industrial groundwork has already been laid, born of an earlier desperation. Back in the summer of 1940, with the Battle of Britain raging, the British government realized they needed a backup source for the Merlin. They looked to the sleeping giant of American industry. Initially, the contract was offered to Henry Ford, But Ford, an isolationist with complex political views, publicly refused to manufacture engines for a foreign combatant. The deal collapsed. The British Purchasing Commission then turned to the Packard Motor Car Company in Detroit. Packard was a luxury brand, known for building the cars of presidents and royalty, machines of exquisite engineering and high price tags. They were not a mass-volume producer like Ford or GM, but they possessed a culture of precision that the British respected. In September 1940, a deal was signed. Packard would build the Rolls-Royce Merlin under license. It seemed like a straightforward transaction. Take the proven British design and replicate it in Detroit. But as the first crates of technical data arrive at the Packard plant on East Grand Boulevard, the celebration turns into confusion. The American engineers, led by the brilliant and pragmatic Colonel Jesse Vincent, open the canisters to find thousands of linen drawings that are practically alien artifacts. The clash is instantaneous. British engineering is an art form, a system of fitting, where skilled craftsmen file parts down until they mesh perfectly. Every engine is slightly unique. A cylinder head from one Merlin might not fit perfectly onto another without hand finishing. American engineering, however, is the religion of interchangeability. A piston made in January must fit a cylinder block cast in June, with 0 hand adjustments, on an assembly line moving at relentless speed. The Packard team realizes they cannot simply build the Merlin. They have to reinvent the process of building it. They are looking at a redesign of over 14,000 individual parts. They must translate the craftsman dialect of Rolls-Royce into the automotive language of Detroit. And they must do it while the 8th Air Force is being decimated over Germany, waiting for an escort that does not yet exist. The war for the Mustang is not being fought in the air yet. It is being fought on the drafting tables of Detroit. The conflict between Packard and Rolls-Royce is not merely technical. It is cultural. It is a collision between the old world tradition of individual mastery and the new world doctrine of mass standardization. When Packard engineers analyze the British blueprints, they find a critical systemic incompatibility: the screw threads. The entire British Empire runs on the Whitworth standard, screws with rounded roots and crests, cut at a 55-degree angle. American industry runs on the Sellers, or SAE standard, screws with flat roots and crests cut at a 60-degree angle. This sounds like a minor detail, but in engineering, it is a catastrophe. A British bolt cannot be tightened into an American nut. They will strip and seize. For Packard to build the Merlin, they face a binary choice. Either retool their entire factory to cut obsolete British threads, forcing them to source custom screws for every single engine forever, or redesign every single threaded component of the Merlin engine to American standards. Colonel Jesse Vincent, Packard's chief of engineering, makes the hard call: Americanize everything. This decision triggers one of the most massive clerical undertakings of the war. 200 draftsmen are pulled from car design to begin the translation. They must take 2,000 original Rolls-Royce drawings and explode them into nearly 14,000 detailed American manufacturing blueprints. The differences go deeper than threads. The British drawings use first angle projection, a method of visual layout where the top view is drawn below the front view. American engineers use third angle projection, where the top view is above. To a Detroit machinist, a British blueprint looks upside down and inside out. If handed to a factory worker without conversion, they would machine the parts backward. Then there is the issue of air tolerance. Rolls-Royce relies on a selective assembly method. If a crankshaft bearing is slightly too tight, a skilled fitter scrapes it by hand until it spins perfectly. The British blueprints often lack hard upper and lower dimensional limits, assuming a craftsman's judgment will bridge the gap. Packard engineers are horrified. In Detroit, hand-fitting is a dirty word. It implies failure. In mass production, a worker on the line does not scrape or file. He bolts and goes. Parts must be interchangeable. A piston manufactured on Tuesday must fit a block cast on Friday, with zero modification. To achieve this, Packard tightens the tolerances. Where Rolls-Royce might allow a margin of error that requires hand tuning, Packard demands precision down to the 10,000th of an inch, enforced by rigid go-no-go gauges. When British engineers visit the Detroit plant, they are initially skeptical. They believe the Americans are obsessing over numbers and missing the art of the engine. They worry that mass-produced parts will be loose and sloppy. But as the first Packard P-1650 components come off the line, the skepticism vanishes. The parts are not sloppy. They are hyper-accurate. The surface finishes are smoother. The gears mesh with a consistency that rivals the hand-built originals. Packard hasn't just copied the Merlin. They have democratized its quality. They have turned a piece of artisanal jewelry into an industrial brick. This successful translation lays the foundation for the V1653 and 7, the engines that will power the P-51B and D. But solving the production puzzle is only half the battle. Now they must tackle the technology that makes the Merlin legendary, the supercharger. While the draftsmen wrestle with blueprints, the engineers confront the physics of the stratosphere. The heart of the Packard I-1650's dominance is not the cylinders or the pistons. It is the supercharger. To fight at 30,000 feet, where the air is 1/3 the density of sea level, an engine must act as its own atmosphere generator. The previous Allison engine failed because it compressed air in a single violent stage. This generated tremendous heat. Hot air is less dense and prone to pre-ignition, causing the fuel to detonate rather than burn. The engine would literally knock itself to death if pushed too hard. The Packard-built Merlin solves this with complexity. It utilizes a 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger. The air is compressed once, then passed to a second impeller, where it is compressed again. But the genius lies in the plumbing between the blower and the engine. Before the supercompressed, superheated air enters the cylinders, it passes through a liquid-cooled intercooler, a radiator sitting right on top of the engine block. This heat exchanger drops the temperature of the intake charge, making the air dense and oxygen-rich. It allows the V1650 to feed the cylinders with high-pressure air without melting the pistons. It is a thermodynamic tightrope walk, performed at 3,000 RPM. But installing this power plant into the P-51 creates a new aerodynamic crisis. The Merlin is a liquid-cooled engine, and it runs hot. It requires a massive radiator system to shed that heat. In a Spitfire or a Bf-109, the radiators are mounted under the wings, creating significant drag. They are like buckets hanging in the wind. Edgar Schmude and the North American Aviation team refuse to ruin their laminar flow wing with underwing pods. Instead, they double down on a radical design feature, the belly scoop. Located under the fuselage, aft of the cockpit, the air scoop is the defining silhouette of the P-51. It is not just a hole for air, it is a jet engine in reverse. As the Mustang speeds up, air enters the scoop and slows down, expanding into the radiator matrix. As it absorbs the massive heat from the boiling coolant and oil, the air expands rapidly. The ducting at the rear of the scoop nozzles this hot, expanding air out the back. This creates a small but measurable amount of forward thrust, a phenomenon known as the Meredith effect. In a dive, the cooling system actually offsets its own drag. While other fighters are slowed down by their radiators, the P-51 is arguably pushed by its own waste heat. The marriage of the Packard V1650 and the North American airframe is finally consummated in the XP-51B prototype. It is a dense, tightly packed machine. The engine bay is so full that mechanics will later curse the lack of space for a wrench. But the numbers on the slide rules are undeniable. The drag is low, the power is high, the range is theoretical but promising. However, theory is about to crash into reality. It is late 1943. The 8th Air Force has paused deep penetration raids because they have no escorts. The Luftwaffe is mocking the Allies. The Packard factory is churning out engines, and the North American factory in Inglewood is ready to switch lines. The components are ready. The question is no longer can it fly, but can it fight? October 14th, 1943. While Packard assembly lines in Detroit are roaring 24 hours a day, the air war over Europe hits its absolute nadir. This date will go down in history as Black Thursday. Mission 115. The target is the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, deep inside Germany. 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses take off from England. They are escorted part of the way by P-47 Thunderbolts, but near the German border, the Thunderbolts hit their fuel limits. They waggle their wings, a gesture of good luck, and turn back. The moment the American fighters vanish, the Luftwaffe pounces. It is a coordinated execution. German twin-engine fighters launch rockets from outside gun range to break the formations, while single-engine FW-190s slash through the shattered boxes. The intercoms of the B-17s are filled with screams and static. 60 bombers are shot down. Another 138 sustain significant damage. Over 600 airmen are killed or captured in a single afternoon. The 8th Air Force is not just beaten, it is broken. General Ira Eaker is forced to suspend deep penetration raids. The Luftwaffe has won the air. They have proven that unescorted bombers cannot survive daylight over Germany. The entire concept of American strategic bombing is on the verge of being scrapped. But quietly, almost unnoticed amidst the funeral notices, the solution has arrived in the theater. The 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, touches down in Boxstead, England. They are flying the brand new P-51B, powered by the Packard VF-1653. The plane is a revelation, but it is not perfect. The gun jams are frequent. The cockpit heating fails at altitude, leaving pilots risking frostbite. But the fuel gauges tell a different story. With drop tanks, these planes carry enough fuel to fly to Berlin and back. The first combat missions are tentative. The Luftwaffe pilots, spotting the silhouette of a Mustang, assume it is the old Allison-powered Mark I. A low-altitude threat, easily outclimbed. They are about to make a fatal miscalculation. On an early patrol, a flight of Messerschmitt Bf 109s dives on a group of these new Mustangs, expecting them to scatter or stall as they try to climb. Instead, the P-51 pilots drop their external tanks, slam the throttles forward, and engage the superchargers. The Packard engines roar to 67 inches of manifold pressure. The Mustangs do not stall, they surge upward, meeting the Germans at 25,000 feet with energy to spare. The shock among the German pilots is palpable in their radio intercepts. They are being chased and caught at altitudes where no Allied fighter was supposed to exist, but the true test is yet to come. The 8th Air Force commanders, desperate to restart the bombing campaign, look at the 354th Fighter Group and issue a command that sounds like a suicide pact. Escort the bombers all the way to the capital, to the heart of the Reich, to Berlin. March 6, 1944. Mission 250. The target is Berlin. 660 B-17s and B-24s struggle into the thin air over the North Sea, but this time they are not alone. Flying alongside them is a swarm of P-51B Mustangs, their Packard engines humming a steady mechanical rhythm. They are carrying 108-gallon paper drop tanks under their wings, huge reservoirs of fuel that defy the logic of 1940s aviation. As the armada crosses the German border, the Luftwaffe rises. The German fighter controllers vector, hundreds of FW-190s and BF-109s to intercept. They expect the usual routine. The American escorts will reach the limit of their range near the Rhine, turn back, and leave the bombers naked for the slaughter. But the Rhine comes and goes. The Mustangs stay. They cross the Weser River. The Mustangs stay. They cross the Elbe. The Mustangs are still there. When the formation appears over the suburbs of Berlin, the psychological shock to the Nazi hierarchy is absolute. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, reportedly stares at the reports in disbelief. He had famously claimed that no enemy plane would ever fly over the Reich territory. Later, he would admit to allies that when he saw American fighters over Berlin, he knew the war was lost. It was an impossibility, made real by American manufacturing and British engineering. But presence is not victory. The battle begins. The German pilots, desperate to defend their capital, attack with ferocity. At 28,000 feet, the air is thin and bitterly cold, minus 50 degrees Celsius. In these conditions, engines usually die. But the Packard V1650s are thriving. The two-stage superchargers scream, compressing the thin air, feeding the cylinders, maintaining 1,600 horsepower, where the German engines are beginning to fade. It is here that the new commander of the 8th Air Force, General Jimmy Doolittle, plays his masterstroke. Until now, escort pilots were ordered to stay glued to the bombers, close escort. It was a defensive, passive tactic. Doolittle walks into the headquarters and sees a sign that reads, "The first duty of the 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive." He orders it taken down. The new order is simple and ruthless. Pursue and destroy the enemy air force wherever you find them. He takes the leash off the Mustang. Over Berlin, the P-51 pilots drop their tanks and go on the hunt. They do not wait for the Germans to attack. They range miles ahead of the bomber stream, sweeping the skies. They catch the Luftwaffe pilots while they are still forming up, while they are climbing, while they are landing. Captain Don Gentile, flying a P-51B named Shangri-La, dives on a Focke-Wulf 190. The German pilot pulls hard, trying to use his roll rate to escape. In a Spitfire, Gentile might have lost him. In a P-47, he might have been too heavy to follow the turn, but in the Mustang, he sticks to the enemy's tail like a shadow. The Packard engine responds instantly to his throttle inputs. He fires a short burst from his .450 caliber machine guns. The FW-190 smokes and plummets. By the end of the day, the 8th Air Force has lost 69 bombers, a heavy price. But the Luftwaffe has lost heavily in machines and, more importantly, in pilots. The sanctuary is gone. There is no place in the sky over Germany, from the deck to the stratosphere, where a German pilot is safe. The P-51 has turned the hunter into the hunted. By the spring of 1944, the dynamic of the air war has inverted. The hunter has become the hunted. The introduction of the Packard Merlin Mustang does not just protect the bombers. It initiates a campaign of attrition that the German war machine cannot sustain. This period becomes known among the German pilots as the Great Blow. The statistics are grim and absolute. Between January and May 1944, the Luftwaffe loses 2,162 fighter pilots. This is not just a loss of manpower. It is a brain drain of irreplaceable expertise. In the previous years, a German experter, an ace, could survive for hundreds of missions, accumulating victories and teaching new recruits. Now they are being shot down before they can even radio a warning. The Packard V1650 engine is the engine of this destruction. Its reliability and fuel efficiency allow American pilots to loiter over German airfields. They engage in fighter sweeps, roaming far ahead of the bomber streams. When the German fighters take off to intercept the B-17s, they are often bounced on the runway, or during their vulnerable climb-out phase by Mustangs already waiting at 20,000 feet. General Adolf Galland, the general of fighters for the Luftwaffe, issues desperate reports to Berlin. He notes that the technical superiority of the German fighter has vanished. The Bf-109G and FW-190 are still dangerous machines, but at high altitude, where the Americans dictate the fight, the two-stage supercharger of the Merlin gives the P-51 a decisive energy advantage. Galland writes that the American fighters are everywhere, and that his pilots are exhausted, often flying 2 or 3 sorties a day against overwhelming odds. The psychological impact is devastating. German pilots, once the knights of the air, are now forced into a defensive crouch. Training times for new Luftwaffe recruits are slashed from 200 hours to barely 50 hours in a desperate attempt to fill empty cockpits. These green pilots are sent up in complex, high-performance aircraft against American veterans flying the most forgiving fighter of the war. The result is a massacre. On the ground, the impact is equally severe. With the P-51D model arriving in mid-1944, featuring the bubble canopy for 360-degree visibility and 650 caliber machine guns, the Mustangs begin strafing ground targets on their return trips. Locomotives, truck convoys, and parked aircraft are destroyed by the thousands. The Packard engine's liquid cooling system is vulnerable to ground fire. A single bullet to the radiator can seize the engine, but the sheer number of Mustangs overwhelms the flak defenses. The strategic consequence is total air superiority. When D-Day arrives on June 6, 1944, the Allies fly over 14,000 sorties. The Luftwaffe manages fewer than 320. The sky over Normandy is empty of German planes because the P-51's have already killed them over Berlin. The little friend has cleared the board. The victory in the air is underpinned by a victory in the factory. By the time the production lines in Detroit finally slow down in 1945, the Packard Motor Car Company has achieved the impossible. They have not just learned to build the Merlin, they have perfected the art of mass producing it. The final tally is staggering. Packard manufactures 55,523 Merlin engines. This single American company produces nearly as many Merlins as the entire British industrial complex combined. And they do it with a consistency that rewrites the rulebook of aviation engineering. In the early days of the war, a high-performance aircraft engine was treated like a Swiss watch, delicate, temperamental, and requiring constant expert attention. Packard turned it into a spark plug. By 1945, a ground crew mechanic in a muddy field in France can uncrate a Packard V1650, bolt it to a P-51 firewall, connect the lines, and send a pilot into combat with absolute confidence that the engine will deliver 1,700 horsepower without missing a beat. This industrial dominance crushes the German war effort. While Packard is streamlining production, standardizing parts, and lowering costs, the German engine industry is fragmenting. Forced underground by Allied bombing, relying increasingly on slave labor, and suffering from a lack of rare alloys like nickel and chromium, German engine quality plummets. Their jet engines like the Jumo 004 are technological marvels, but have a service life of barely 10 to 20 hours. The Packard Merlin often runs for hundreds of hours between overhauls. The legacy of this engineering feat extends far beyond 1945. The P-51 Mustang, powered by the Packard Merlin, remains the definitive piston engine fighter of history. It serves in the US Air Force well into the jet age, seeing combat in Korea where it is finally replaced by the F-86 Sabre. Even decades later, in the high-octane world of the Reno air races, the sound of a V-12 screaming at 500 miles per hour is almost invariably the sound of a Packard-built engine. But the most profound consequence is the shift in global power. The Packard Merlin project proved that American industry could do more than just build trucks and tanks. It could absorb the most sophisticated technology in the world, standardize it, improve it, and produce it at a scale no other nation could comprehend. The arsenal of democracy had not just outproduced the Axis, it had out-engineered them. History often remembers the Second World War through the lens of individual heroism, the pilot in the cockpit, the paratrooper in the door, the Marine on the beach. But the true turning point of the air war was not decided by a dogfight. It was decided by a blueprint. The P-51 Mustang is remembered as the Cadillac of the skies, an American icon of speed and power. Yet, beneath its aluminum skin beat a British heart, transplanted and multiplied by the industrial might of Detroit. The Mustang was neither wholly American nor wholly British. It was the ultimate hybrid of the Allied cause. It combined the aerodynamic genius of North American aviation with the mechanical brilliance of Rolls-Royce and the relentless, standardized force of Packard. Without the British Merlin, the Mustang would have remained a footnote, a low-altitude scout destined for obscurity. Without the American Packard lines, the Merlin would have remained a precious, handcrafted jewel, too rare to sweep the skies of an entire continent. It took the friction of two different engineering cultures, grinding against each other until they found a common language to create the weapon that broke the Luftwaffe. In the end, the victory over Europe proved a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Innovation is only as powerful as your ability to replicate it. The Germans built arguably the most advanced weapons of the war, jets, rockets, guided bombs, but they built them as prototypes. The Allies built the P-51 by the thousands. As the sun sets over the abandoned airfields of East Anglia, the ghost of that roar still lingers. The deep, rhythmic song of a V-12 engine that traveled across an ocean to find its home, and in doing so cleared the path for the liberation of a world.